Hi, I'm Dean Bushmiller with Expanding Security, and we're here to talk about program management principles and practices, which is K0798, if you're following along in NICS. Now, what are the components of policy and program management? And we start off with the organization and we say, hey, you know what? Let's look at the alignment of the policies and the controls. That's really what we want to look at. You can look in my other videos and I talk about the very detailed process of getting the policies and controls together. And so we're going to say as an assumption that you already know that. When we start off with programs and policy management that are out there, we obtain commitment from senior management. If we don't have that, we don't go any further. We're going to develop and disseminate a project plan. Now, it's information security program management, but we have to have a plan for getting ready for doing the planning, right? We'll set the purpose, scope, and objectives for the information security program. And this is where we get into the roles and responsibilities and accountability at a high level and also at a very detailed level. We find somebody in our organization that is going to design the policy architecture for us. This would be a really good person for this would be somebody who understands not only what we do as far as information security people are concerned, but also somebody who can write very well. Sometimes we call these people policy architects. Now we're going to create a framework of our directive controls. Remember, directive controls are going to be policies, they're going to be procedures, they're going to be baselines, guidelines, standards, maybe even best practices. And all those directive controls that we have, we're going to create a framework for them. Going back to that English major for a moment in time, we're going to define styles of consistency that are going to work across our entire organization. This becomes a problem later on after we've gotten 2 or 3 revisions and we revise that and we revise that and we revise that and it was written by different people. And then it seems kind of disjointed at that point. Now we're going to understand and address the risk in the organization, and this is where we go away from just pure policy versus control stuff. We're going to do the risk assessment. We're going to categorize the information systems themselves. We will be very detailed about that. We'll do a business impact analysis. What happens if this server is turned off? We'll create a risk management strategy, and then we'll reach out to our supply chain and look at that risk management process with them. By the way, this really comes down to doing lots and lots of contract management, which I know is not fun, but it really needs to be done at a technical level for our organization. We just can't hand it over to the contracting officer. Next, we develop and implement the security controls. We're actually building in these controls and deploying them in our architecture. We're going to have to select them and then document those controls. This is who's in charge of this, roles and responsibilities. This is how we get this. This is when the vendor says that we have to re-up our service contract. This is what our service contracts look like. Are they gold, silver, platinum, bronze, or just tin? What do we get for service? Is it self-service? How do we deal with that? Now we're going to design that robust security architecture where we take all those controls and we bring them together so that our intrusion detection system and our data loss prevention system, they actually talk back and forth to each other to go ahead and say, hey, you know what? Dean's being bad because he's trying to copy and paste out social security numbers. And so the data loss prevention system tries to catch me at that. And then the intrusion detection system says, well, he shouldn't have been doing that in the first place. So we're going to go ahead and block all of his access to the internet. We could get really detailed about that. We need to find an engineering of security into our organization, into our systems, into every single system. If we're going to use multi-factor authentication and we put that across all these assets and something new happens tomorrow, oh, we've got this cool new tool that does this great business thing right here. Is it multi-factor capable? Well, no. Okay, well then you can't use that. Wait a minute, business says we're going to make $1 million with this thing over here, so you're going to go ahead and implement this, and you're not going to, you're going to skip all that multi-factor garbage. We need to engineer it into the system. So we'll develop specific security controls, and that includes the documentation, the system security plan, where it falls in the plan. We'll actually implement the control. We'll pay to have it put in place if it isn't already existing in place. Then we'll do good configuration management. We'll fold this up into our change control process, into our incident handling process, into our help desk process. We'll look at our interconnected requirements. And if necessary, from one line of business to another line of business, when we have those two competing ones, and you're using multi-factor authentication over here, and we're using multi-factor authentication over there, we might need to redeploy those so that we get a consistency from your side of the line of business to my side of the line of business so that we get the same level of security, that we reduce that risk to an acceptable level as defined by management. The controls in place. Is it working well for us? What is its effectiveness at this point? So we're going to have to develop a plan for assessments that's going to include audit, usually from third parties, penetration testing that could be from third parties or internally. And then remember, once we find that information, we need to adjust that control. Now, the assessing the control's effectiveness a lot of times gets shoved into the maintenance cycle, but it really should be a separate step. Speaking of maintenance, we're going to do continuous monitoring, configuration management, and if we are in an organization that is government or military, we're going to review our operational readiness because there would be a separate step that's not listed here, but there would be a separate step that said, okay, we can turn that asset on. We can turn that asset on because all the controls are there for it. In maintenance, we're going to manage and analyze logs. A lot of times today, this gets picked up off of the regular business asset and it gets shoved up into a seam. We need to then, if we're going to analyze and manage those logs, we need to tune them and know what the application log actually means when it throws this particular error. We'll incorporate that all into the incident response plan. Sometimes less sophisticated organizations call this a help desk, but you may have an incident response plan. You may have a forensics plan in place. Then we layer on top of it the awareness training and education, integrate the security controls across the entire life cycle, and then we get to this last piece. Now, this may seem simple. Integrate security into the capital planning and investment control process. What does that mean? That doesn't mean we bought the firewall and we're done. When we talk about integrating into our entire organization, think about it like this. That firewall today is going to be upgraded to a new version tomorrow. That new version is going to have configuration changes to it, and it's going to be an updated interface or updated controls on it. We're going to have then have money to spend to train the person that's in the position that runs the firewall. We're going to have to train them on the new version of the system. When we go to that organization and upgrade our firewall, they're going to say, okay, you have to pay a new contract, a new service contract. We're going to take that expense, the expense of the training, the expense of incorporating all of that into our configuration management, bundle all of that together and say, this is the real cost of this particular control, and integrating it to the others. Now, where this becomes really valuable to you, and this is your last thing before we break off here, the really valuable thing to you is for you to figure out how this control that you have here that's working well and integrated into the process, when somebody says, well, I like that firewall over there, I want that firewall, bring that one in, let's get rid of this old one right here. If you've done good integration into your capital planning, you can say, here are all the other effects that are here. And what they're going to say is, you know what, we get a 14-day trial for this, so this isn't going to cost us anything. The cost of a 14-day trial should be equivalent to roughly about a month's worth of engineering cost and all of the other costs that are there. It's all that hidden cost that's built into, that's hidden away into this until you actually deploy that actual asset in your organization. So be ready for that.